The Arizona sun was setting when Lisa walked into the small community center on the reservation. She was a young reporter working on a story about land problems in the area. The building was old but clean, with colorful Native American artwork on the walls. Lisa was looking for people to interview when she noticed an elderly woman sitting alone in the corner. The woman had silver hair braided down her back and wore a simple blue dress. What caught Lisa's attention were the strange marks on the woman's hands. At first glance, they looked like tattoos, dark lines and shapes that seemed to tell a story. But something about them felt different. They weren't the kind of decorative tattoos young people got these days. These marks had a rougher quality, like they had been made with pain. The elderly woman noticed Lisa staring and looked down at her hands. For a moment, her face changed. The peaceful expression disappeared, replaced by something that looked like old fear. "Excuse me," Lisa said softly, walking over. "I'm Lisa Chen. I'm a reporter writing about the community here. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" The woman looked up with tired eyes. "I'm Elena Crowfeather," she said. "I suppose you can sit." Lisa pulled up a chair. "I couldn't help but notice the beautiful artwork on your hands. Is there a story behind them?" Elena's hands trembled slightly as she pulled them closer to her body. She was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at the desert landscape. "You think they're artwork?" Elena asked finally. "Well, yes. They're very detailed. Did someone in your family do them? Is it a tradition?" Elena let out a sound that might have been a laugh, but there was no happiness in it. She looked around the room to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned forward. "Child," she whispered. "This isn't ink. These are scars." Lisa felt her heart skip a beat. She looked more carefully at Elena's hands. Now she could see that the lines weren't raised like tattoos. They were indented into the skin like old wounds that had healed badly. "Scars?" Lisa repeated. Elena nodded slowly. "Every mark you see here was made by a man named James Brennan. He owned the biggest ranch in this county back in the 1940s. But how? Why?" Elena was quiet again, her fingers tracing one of the scars on her left hand. "These aren't my scars," she said finally. "They belong to my grandmother, Morningstar." Lisa's mind was racing. "Your grandmother? But the scars are on your hands. In our culture, we believe that trauma can pass from one generation to the next. When my grandmother died, I started getting these marks. They appeared slowly over many years, each one in the exact same place where she had been hurt." Lisa had heard of similar stories in her research about inherited trauma, but she had never seen physical evidence like this. "Elena, what happened to your grandmother?" The old woman's eyes filled with tears. "She worked for the Brennan family, cleaned their house, cooked their food. James Brennan was a powerful man. He owned thousands of acres and had connections with the sheriff, the mayor, everyone who mattered in this county." "And he hurt her?" Elena nodded. "More than hurt, he did terrible things. When she tried to fight back, he would burn her hands with his cigarette. When she tried to run away, he would cut her with a knife. He said no one would believe an Apache woman over a white rancher." Lisa felt sick to her stomach. "Did she ever report it?" "Report it to who?" "His brother-in-law was the sheriff. His cousin was the judge, and this was 1943. Native people had no rights back then. We were barely considered human. So she just suffered in silence?" Elena stood up slowly, her joints creaking with age. Not entirely in silence. She kept a journal. Wrote down everything that happened to her. She hid it for over 50 years. Lisa's reporter instincts kicked in. "Do you still have this journal?" Elena looked at her carefully, as if trying to decide whether to trust her. "I might. But why do you want to know?" "This story is old. The man who hurt her is dead." "Because the truth matters," Lisa said. "Because your grandmother's story deserves to be told. And because there might be other families with similar stories." Elena was quiet for a long time. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small worn book wrapped in cloth. She wrote in Apache and in English. Elena said, "Some parts are hard to read because she was hurt when she wrote them." Her hands would shake. Lisa looked at the journal with reverence. It was more than just a book. It was evidence of a woman's survival against impossible odds. "Elena, would you be willing to let me read this? Would you be willing to tell your grandmother's story?" The elderly woman looked out the window again. The sun had completely set now, and the first stars were appearing in the dark sky. "I'm 73 years old," she said finally. "I've been carrying this secret my whole life. Maybe it's time to let it go." She handed the journal to Lisa with shaking hands. "But you have to promise me something," Elena said. "If you tell this story, you tell it right. You don't make my grandmother into a victim. She was a fighter. She survived. And she made sure the truth would live on." Lisa held the journal carefully, feeling the weight of the responsibility Elena was giving her. "I promise," she said. As Lisa left the community center that night, she had no idea how much this story would change everything, not just for Elena and her family, but for the entire community. The scars on Elena's hands were just the beginning. There were many more secrets buried in the desert waiting to be discovered. Lisa spent the next 3 days reading Morningstar's journal. The pages were yellow with age, and some of the writing was faded, but the story was clear. It was a story of horror that had been hidden for over 70 years. She drove back to the reservation to meet Elena again. This time they met at Elena's small house on the edge of town. The house was simple but comfortable, with family photos covering every wall. "I see you've been reading," Elena said, noticing the tired look in Lisa's eyes. "Elena, I had no idea what your grandmother went through. It's unimaginable." Elena poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from Lisa. "Tell me what you learned." Lisa opened the journal carefully. "According to this, your grandmother started working for the Brennan family in 1942. She was just 19 years old. Yes, her parents had died and she needed work. The Brennan Ranch was one of the few places that would hire native people. The journal says James Brennan seemed nice at first." Elena's face darkened. "Predators always do. They gain your trust before they hurt you." Lisa turned to a page she had marked. "She writes here that the problem started after she had been working there for about 3 months. James began making comments about her appearance." "Read it," Elena said quietly. Lisa cleared her throat and read from the journal. "Mr. Brennan said I have pretty eyes today. His wife was in town. He stood too close to me while I was washing dishes. I felt scared but didn't know why." Elena nodded. She was innocent. She didn't understand what was happening. "It got worse quickly," Lisa continued. "By December of that year, he was attacking her regularly." The 2 women sat in silence for a moment. "The scars on your hands," Lisa said finally. "When did they start appearing?" Elena looked down at her hands. 3 days after my grandmother's funeral in 1998. I woke up and there was a small burn mark on my left hand. Right here." She pointed to a circular scar on her palm. "It was the first mark he gave her. That must have been terrifying. I thought I was losing my mind. I went to doctors, but they couldn't explain it. The marks kept appearing, always in the same places where she had been hurt." Lisa turned more pages in the journal. She wrote about trying to quit several times, but she couldn't. Her family needed the money and Brennan threatened her. He said if she left, he would make sure no native person in the county could find work. The journal mentions other women who worked there. Elena's eyes sharpened. "Yes, my grandmother wasn't the only one. There was a woman named Rose and another named Mary. They all suffered." "What happened to them?" "Rose moved away in 1945. No one heard from her again. Mary," Elena paused. "Mary took her own life in 1947. Lisa felt her heart breaking. "Elena, this is bigger than just your grandmother's story." "I know. That's what scares me." Lisa leaned forward. "The journal mentions that your grandmother tried to document everything. Not just the abuse, but evidence." Elena got up and walked to an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. She pulled out a large envelope. "She saved things," Elena said, bringing the envelope back to the table. "Things she thought might be important someday." Inside the envelope were photographs, letters, and other documents. Lisa's hands trembled as she looked through them. "This is a photograph of your grandmother's injuries," Lisa said, holding up a black and white photo. She convinced a traveling photographer to take that picture in 1944. She told him she had been in an accident. There were also payroll records showing that native women were paid far less than white employees, and a letter from James Brennan to his foreman discussing discipline problems with the native workers. "Elena, why are you showing me this now? You've kept this secret for 75 years. Elena sat back down heavily. "Because I'm getting old, and when I die, this story dies with me. My children moved away years ago. They don't want to hear about the old troubles, but also," Elena looked out the window toward the Brennan Ranch, which could be seen in the distance. "Because he's still there, Who's still there? James Brennan's grandson, Thomas Brennan. He owns the ranch now. And I've heard stories. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. What kind of stories? Women who work there still talk about problems. Different kinds of problems than my grandmother faced, but still problems. And Thomas Brennan has the same kind of power his grandfather had. Lisa closed the journal and looked at Elena seriously. If I write this story, it's going to cause a lot of trouble. Are you prepared for that? Elena was quiet for a long time. Then she stood up and walked to one of the family photos on the wall. It showed a young native woman in traditional dress. This is Morningstar when she was 20, Elena said. Look at her face, Lisa looked. The woman in the photo had bright, hopeful eyes and a gentle smile. Now look at this. Elena showed her another photo of the same woman, taken several years later. The hopeful eyes were gone, replaced by a haunted, fearful expression. That's what he took from her, Elena said. Her joy, her hope, her trust in the world. She never got those things back. Elena turned to face Lisa. I've lived with her pain my entire life. These scars have reminded me every day of what was done to her. If telling her story can prevent even one other woman from suffering the same way, then whatever trouble comes will be worth it. Lisa packed up the journal and documents carefully. Elena, you're very brave to do this. I'm not brave, Elena said. I'm tired. I'm tired of carrying the secret. I'm tired of pretending that everything is fine. I'm tired of protecting men who don't deserve protection. As Lisa drove home that evening, she knew her life was about to change dramatically. This wasn't just a story about historical injustice. This was a story about a community that had been silenced for generations, and a woman who was finally ready to speak. Lisa spent the next 2 weeks digging into the history of the Brennan Ranch. What she found made her stomach turn. The ranch had been established in 1923 by James Brennan's father, William Brennan. From the beginning, they had relied heavily on Native American workers because they could pay them less and treat them worse than white employees. Lisa visited the county records office, a dusty building that smelled like old paper and forgotten stories. The clerk, an elderly man named Bob, seemed suspicious at first. You're the second person this month asking about the Brennans, he said. Someone else has been researching them? Young woman from the university. Said she was writing a paper about local history. Lisa made a mental note to track down this other researcher. She spent hours going through employment records, police reports, and newspaper archives. What she found was disturbing. Between 1940 and 1960, at least 15 Native American women had worked at the Brennan Ranch. Most of them had left suddenly with no forwarding addresses. Even more strange, there were almost no police reports filed against James Brennan during this entire period. In a county where domestic violence calls were common, the Brennan Ranch was remarkably quiet in official records. But Lisa found other clues. Hospital records showed that several Native American women had been treated for unusual injuries during the 1940s and 1950s. Burns, cuts, and other wounds that the doctors had noted as suspicious. One hospital record from 1946 caught her attention. A woman named Rose Two Eagles had been treated for severe burns on her hands and arms. The attending doctor had written, "Patient claims injuries from cooking accident, but burn patterns are inconsistent with this explanation." Lisa's heart raced. Rose Two Eagles. This was one of the women Elena had mentioned. That evening, Lisa drove back to the reservation to see Elena. I found something, Lisa said, showing her the hospital record. Rose Two Eagles. You said she worked at the ranch. Elena's eyes widened. Rose is still alive. What? Where? She moved to New Mexico after she left the ranch. But she came back about 5 years ago to take care of her sister. She lives about 20 miles from here. The next day, Lisa and Elena drove to visit Rose Two Eagles. She lived in a small trailer surrounded by desert plants and sculptures made from old car parts. Rose was 85 years old, tiny and frail, but her eyes were sharp and alert. When Elena introduced Lisa, Rose immediately became suspicious. You're a reporter? Rose asked. Yes, but I'm here because Elena thought you might want to tell your story. My story is private. Elena leaned forward. Rose, I told her about Morningstar. Rose's expression changed completely. She looked at Elena's hands, then back at her face. The marks came to you too? Elena nodded. 3 days after the funeral. Rose was quiet for a long time. Then she rolled up her sleeves. Her arms were covered with thin white scars and geometric patterns. These aren't mine either. Rose said quietly. They belonged to my grandmother, Yellowbird. Lisa felt dizzy. Your grandmother worked at the ranch too? 1944 to 1947. She was there at the same time as Morningstar. Elena reached over and took Rose's scarred hand. We never talked about it. We were taught not to talk about it. Our families were ashamed. They thought we had somehow brought it on ourselves. Rose invited them inside her trailer. The walls were covered with traditional Native American artwork and family photos. She made tea and sat down across from them. Yellowbird tried to protect the younger women, Rose said. When James Brennan would go after someone like Morningstar, my grandmother would try to distract him. How? She would make mistakes on purpose. Break dishes, burn food, anything to make him angry at her instead. Lisa was taking notes furiously. So he would hurt your grandmother instead? Rose nodded. She said it was better for an old woman to suffer than a young one. Rose, do you know what happened to Mary? Elena mentioned someone named Mary who worked there. Rose's face went pale. Mary Singing Wolf. She was just 16 when she started working there. What happened to her? James Brennan. He was particularly cruel to her. She was so young and pretty. He wouldn't leave her alone. Rose got up and walked to a wooden box on a shelf. She pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Mary gave this to my grandmother before she died. Inside the cloth was a piece of bark with symbols carved into it. Traditional Apache writing, Elena said, examining the bark. This tells a story, Rose nodded. Mary documented everything that happened to her, but she did it in the old way. She carved her story into tree bark. Lisa looked at the symbols. What does it say? Elena and Rose worked together to translate the symbols. It's a record of dates and events, Elena said, her voice getting quieter. Mary kept track of every time he hurt her. The piece of bark told a story of systematic abuse that lasted for almost 3 years. Mary had documented not just her own suffering, but things she had witnessed happening to other women. She was going to take this to the authorities, Rose said. She thought if she had enough evidence, someone would listen, but she never got the chance. Rose shook her head. She was found in the river in March of 1947. The sheriff said it was suicide. But you don't think so? Mary could swim like a fish. She grew up near that river, and she had been making plans to leave town. She was going to move in with relatives in California. Lisa felt the weight of what she was uncovering. This wasn't just about 1 or 2 women. This was about a pattern of abuse that had been covered up for decades. Are there others? Lisa asked. Other families with stories like this? Elena and Rose exchanged looks. There might be, Elena said carefully. The thing is, Rose added, most families don't talk about it. Even now, 75 years later, there's still shame. But there's also fear, Elena said. Fear of what? Rose pointed out her window toward the distant Brennan Ranch. The Brennans still own half this county. Thomas Brennan sits on the school board, the hospital board, the bank board. He has power. And we've heard rumors, Elena added quietly. What kind of rumors? The 2 elderly women looked at each other nervously. Women who work for him now, Rose said. They don't talk openly, but sometimes you hear things. Lisa felt her investigative instincts kicking into high gear. What kinds of things? Young women who quit suddenly. Women who seem scared when they talk about working there. Nothing as bad as what happened to our grandmothers, but still concerning. As Lisa drove home that evening, she realized she was no longer investigating a historical injustice. She was uncovering a pattern of abuse that might still be continuing. She had 3 pieces of evidence now: Morningstar's journal, hospital records, and Mary's carved testimony. But more importantly, she had 2 elderly women who were willing to speak the truth. The question was, how many other families were out there, still carrying secrets they had never told anyone? Elena and Rose agreed to help Lisa find other families who might have similar stories. They started by talking to people at the senior center, asking careful questions about who had worked at local ranches in the 1940s and 1950s. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena's neighbor, Mrs. Garcia, overheard them talking and approached Elena privately. I know why you're asking these questions, Mrs. Garcia said. My mother-in-law used to talk about the Brennan Ranch. She said terrible things happened there. Mrs. Garcia's mother-in-law had been friends with several Apache women who worked at the ranch. She had heard their stories but never spoke about them publicly. She used to say that the women who worked there were like broken birds. Mrs. Garcia explained. They came back different. Through Mrs. Garcia, they learned about Betty Hawk Feather, a 78-year-old woman who lived in a nursing home about an hour away. Betty's aunt had worked at the Brennan Ranch in the early 1950s. When Lisa, Elna, and Rose visited Betty, they found a sharp-minded woman who had been waiting her whole life for someone to ask the right questions. "I was wondering when someone would finally come," Betty said from her wheelchair. "I've been carrying my aunt's story for over 50 years. Betty's aunt, Dancing Cloud, had worked at the ranch from 1951 to 1953. Like the other women, she had suffered abuse at the hands of James Brennan. But my aunt was smarter than he gave her credit for," Betty said with a slight smile. "She documented everything." Betty wheeled herself over to a dresser and pulled out a wooden box. Inside were dozens of small photographs. My aunt had a camera. It was a gift from a traveling missionary. She learned how to use it and she started taking pictures. The photographs were heartbreaking. They showed Dancing Cloud's injuries in stark detail. Burns, cuts, and bruises that told a clear story of systematic abuse. She hid the camera and film in her room at the boarding house where she lived, Betty explained. Every time he hurt her, she would document it. "Why didn't she ever show these to anyone?" Lisa asked. Betty laughed bitterly. "Show them to who?" "The sheriff was Brennan's brother-in-law. The judge was his cousin. The doctor was his golf partner, so she just kept them. She was planning to use them someday. She thought eventually someone would come who would listen, someone who would care." Elena leaned forward. "Betty, did your aunt have the marks too? The scars that passed to family members?" Betty rolled up her sleeves, revealing arms covered with thin, parallel lines. "They started appearing when I turned 50, she said. "Same age my aunt was when the worst of it happened," Rose gasped. "The pattern is the same." "What pattern?" Elena explained how her scars had appeared after Morningstar's death, and how Rose had inherited Yellowbird's marks. "It's like the trauma is passed down through the generations," Elena said. "Our bodies remember what our grandmothers went through." Betty nodded. "My aunt always said that pain doesn't die with the person who experienced it. It lives on in the family." Lisa was documenting everything, but she was also struggling with the emotional weight of what she was learning. "Betty, are you willing to share your aunt's story publicly?" Betty was quiet for a moment, looking at the photographs spread across her bed. "I'm 78 years old," she said finally. "I don't have much time left. If I don't tell her story now, it dies with me." Their next lead came from Betty, who remembered her aunt mentioning a young woman named Grace, who had worked at the ranch around the same time. It took several days of searching, but they eventually found Grace Ironbear, who was now 81 and lived with her daughter in Phoenix. Grace was initially reluctant to talk. She had spent decades trying to forget her time at the Brennan Ranch. "I don't want to remember those things," she told them over the phone. But when Elena explained about the inherited scars and the other women who were sharing their stories, Grace's attitude changed. "You mean I'm not the only one?" "You're not the only one." Grace agreed to meet with them, but only if her daughter could be present. When they met at Grace's daughter's house, they found a woman who had clearly carried trauma her entire life. Grace was nervous and jumpy, startling at sudden noises. "I worked there for 8 months in 1952, Grace said quietly. "It was the worst 8 months of my life." Grace's story was similar to the others, but with some disturbing new details. James Brennan had apparently become more violent and unpredictable as he got older. He started drinking more heavily in the early 1950s, Grace explained. When he was drunk, he was even more dangerous. Grace had also documented her experience, but in a different way. "I wrote letters," she said. "Letters to my sister who lived in California. I told her everything that was happening to me." Grace's daughter went to get a shoebox from another room. It was filled with dozens of letters, all dated between 1952 and 1953. "My aunt saved every letter," the daughter explained. "When she died, she gave them to me and told me to keep them safe." Lisa read through some of the letters. They were written in a simple, direct style that made the horror of Grace's experience even more impactful. One letter, dated October 15, 1952, read, "Dear sister, he hurt me again today. I tried to hide in the barn, but he found me. I don't think I can take much more of this. Pray for me." Another letter from December 3, 1952. "I'm saving money to leave. I have almost enough for a bus ticket. I'm going to come stay with you until I can figure out what to do next. Did you ever make it to California? Elena asked. Grace shook her head. The day before I was supposed to leave, he found out about my plans. He threatened to hurt my family if I left, so you stayed? For 2 more months. Until I couldn't take it anymore. Grace had finally escaped in early 1953, but not before James Brennan had made sure she understood the consequences of speaking out. He told me that if I ever told anyone what had happened, he would make sure I never worked anywhere again. He said he had friends everywhere, and they would make my life hell. Grace's daughter leaned forward. My mother never talked about this until about 10 years ago. She kept it buried her whole life. What changed 10 years ago? Grace looked down at her hands. Like the other women, she had mysterious scars that had appeared later in life. The marks started coming, she said. At first I thought it was just age or maybe an illness. But they appeared in the exact same places where he had hurt me. Lisa now had 4 families with remarkably similar stories. 4 women whose grandmothers or aunts had suffered abuse at the Brennan Ranch. 4 women who had inherited physical scars that appeared decades later. But more importantly, she now had a substantial collection of evidence. Journals, photographs, letters, and carved testimonies that all told the same story. There's something else, Grace said as they were preparing to leave. Something I never told anyone. The room went quiet. There was a woman who worked there before me. An older woman named Catherine. She had been there for years. What happened to her? Grace's voice dropped to a whisper. She tried to stop him one day. When he was hurting me, she came into the room and told him to leave me alone. And I never saw her again after that. When I asked about her, they told me she had quit. But her belongings were still in her room at the boarding house. Elena and Rose exchanged meaningful looks. Grace, Elena said carefully. Do you remember Catherine's last name? Catherine Blue Moon? Rose gasped. Blue Moon was my grandmother's maiden name. The women stared at each other in shock. Catherine Blue Moon was your grandmother? Grace asked. Rose nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. Grace, what exactly happened the day Catherine disappeared? Grace closed her eyes as if trying to remember something she had tried very hard to forget. She came into the room where he was hurting me. She was carrying a kitchen knife. She told him if he didn't stop, she was going to the sheriff, no matter who his family was. And then, he laughed at her. He said no one would believe an old Indian woman. But Catherine wasn't backing down. She said she had been documenting everything for years. She said she had evidence. Rose was crying now. What happened to her? Grace opened her eyes and looked directly at Rose. That was the last time I saw her alive. The room fell into complete silence. Finally, Lisa spoke. Grace, are you saying you think Catherine Blue Moon was murdered? Grace nodded slowly. I think she knew too much, and I think James Brennan made sure she couldn't tell anyone. Lisa felt like the ground was shifting under her feet. She had started investigating historical abuse, but now she might be looking at murder. And if James Brennan had been willing to kill to protect his secrets in the 1950s, what might his grandson be willing to do in 2025? Lisa returned to her small office at the local newspaper with boxes full of evidence. She had journals, photographs, letters, hospital records, and testimony from 4 elderly women. She was confident she had enough material for a powerful investigative series. Her editor, David Rodriguez, had been supportive of her work so far. But when Lisa laid out all the evidence on his desk and explained what she had found, his expression changed. This is huge, Lisa, David said, looking through the photographs and documents. But it's also dangerous. Dangerous how? David picked up one of the hospital records. The Brennan family still has significant influence in this county. Thomas Brennan sits on the hospital board where I have to get my family's health care. His company sponsors half the businesses in town. Are you saying we can't run the story? I'm saying we need to be very careful. These are serious accusations against a prominent family. Lisa felt a knot forming in her stomach. David, this isn't gossip or rumors. This is documented evidence of systematic abuse. Evidence that's 75 years old. That doesn't make it less true. David sighed and sat back in his chair. Lisa, I believe you. I believe these women. But from a legal standpoint, we're in dangerous territory. As if on cue, David's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and frowned. It's the publisher, he said. I need to take this. Lisa stepped outside David's office while he took the call. She could hear him speaking in low, serious tones but couldn't make out the words. When he finished the call, David's face was pale. "That was interesting timing," he said. "What do you mean?" That was the publisher. He just got a call from a lawyer representing the Brennan family. Lisa felt her heart sink. How could they already know about the story? Small towns have no secrets. Someone must have seen you talking to Elena or visiting the nursing home. What did the lawyer say? David handed her a piece of paper. "They're threatening to sue us for defamation if we publish any false or unsubstantiated claims about the Brennan family." Lisa read the legal threat. It was written in formal legal language, but the message was clear. Publish this story and face a lawsuit that could destroy the newspaper. David, this is exactly what these women have been afraid of their whole lives. This is why they stayed silent, I know. But Lisa, we're a small newspaper. We don't have the resources to fight a legal battle against one of the wealthiest families in the county. Lisa gathered up her evidence. So we just let them win? We let them silence these women again? I'm not saying that. I'm saying we need to be smarter about this. That evening, Lisa called Elena to tell her about the legal threats. I was expecting this, Elena said calmly. You were? Thomas Brennan has been calling people on the reservation. He's asking questions about who's been talking to reporters. Lisa felt a chill. He's intimidating people? He's not making direct threats. He's too smart for that. But he's letting people know that he's aware of what's happening. Elena, are you afraid? There was a pause. I'm too old to be afraid. But I'm worried about the younger people. People who still need jobs, who still have children to feed. The next morning, Lisa got a call from Rose Two Eagles. I can't do this anymore, Rose said, her voice shaking. What happened? Someone broke into my trailer last night. They didn't take anything, but they went through my papers. They were looking for something specific. Did you call the police? Rose laughed bitterly. The police chief is Thomas Brennan's golf partner. What do you think he's going to do? Rose, are you safe? I'm staying with my niece for a few days. But Lisa, I don't think I can be part of this story anymore. Lisa felt her investigation crumbling. First the newspaper's legal concerns, now Rose was backing out. Her next call came from Betty Hawk Feather's daughter. My mother wants to talk to you, the daughter said, but not over the phone. Can you come to the nursing home? When Lisa arrived, she found Betty in an agitated state. They came to see me yesterday, Betty said without preamble. Who came to see you? 2 men in expensive suits. They said they were from a law firm, but they wouldn't say which one. What did they want? They asked me about my aunt's photographs. They knew about the pictures. Lisa felt sick. How could they know about the photographs? That's what I want to know. We've only shown them to you and Elena and Rose. Betty's daughter leaned forward. They offered to buy the photographs. They said they were collecting historical artifacts from the region. Did you sell them? Betty shook her head. I told them the pictures weren't for sale, but they were very persistent. What do you mean persistent? They kept mentioning how expensive nursing home care is these days. How important it is to have good insurance. They said they hoped nothing would happen that might affect my coverage. Lisa was furious. They threatened you? Not directly, but the message was clear. Betty's daughter looked scared. We don't know what to do. My mother needs specialized care, and this is the only nursing home in the area that can provide it. Lisa spent the rest of the day trying to figure out how to move forward. 3 of her 4 main witnesses were now either backing out or being intimidated. That evening, she got an unexpected call from Grace Ironbear's daughter in Phoenix. We need to talk, the daughter said. Can you come to Phoenix? Lisa drove to Phoenix the next morning. When she arrived at Grace's daughter's house, she found both women in a state of panic. Someone's been following me, Grace's daughter said. A black car with tinted windows. It's been parked outside my office for 3 days. Did you get the license plate? I tried, but the plate was covered with mud. Grace looked older and more frail than she had just a week earlier. I'm scared, Grace admitted. I haven't been this scared since I worked at that ranch. What do you want to do? Grace's daughter answered. We want to help, but we need protection. We need to know that speaking out won't put us in danger. Lisa realized she was out of her depth. She was a small-town reporter dealing with powerful people who had resources she couldn't compete with. But that evening, she got a call that changed everything. Is this Lisa Chen? An unfamiliar woman's voice asked. Yes. My name is Dr. Patricia Yellowhorse. I'm an anthropologist at Arizona State University. I believe we're working on the same story. Lisa remembered what the county records clerk had said about another researcher asking about the Brennans. "You're the woman who was looking at county records?" "Yes. I've been researching patterns of violence against Native American women in the Southwest. The Brennan case came up in my research." "What kind of research?" "I specialize in intergenerational trauma, how traumatic experiences are passed down through families. I've been documenting cases where trauma manifests physically in subsequent generations." Lisa felt a surge of hope. "Dr. Yellowhorse, would you be willing to examine the women I've been interviewing?" "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd ask. But there's something you should know. The Brennan family is trying to stop this story. They're intimidating witnesses and threatening legal action." There was a pause. "Ms. Chen, I've been documenting cases like this for 15 years. I've dealt with powerful families who want to bury the truth before. The difference is I work for a state university, and I have resources you don't have." "What kind of resources?" "Legal resources, academic freedom protections, and connections with federal investigators who specialize in historical civil rights violations." Lisa felt like she could breathe for the first time in days. "Dr. Yellowhorse, I think we need to meet. I'm already on my way. I'll be there tomorrow morning." That night, Lisa called Elena to tell her about Dr. Yellowhorse. "This could change everything," Lisa said. Elena was quiet for a moment. "Lisa, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "Thomas Brennan called me directly today." Lisa's heart stopped. "What did he say?" "He offered to buy my grandmother's journal. He said he was interested in preserving local history." "You didn't sell it to him, did you?" "Of course not." "But Lisa, he knew details about the journal that only you and I have seen. He knew about specific entries." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. "Elena, is it possible someone else has seen the journal?" "I don't think so. I've kept it locked in a safe deposit box since our first meeting." "Then how does he know about it?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "I think someone's been listening to our conversations." Dr. Patricia Yellowhorse arrived in town driving a university van filled with specialized equipment. She was a tall, confident woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Lisa met her at the motel where she was staying. "Before we do anything else," Dr. Yellowhorse said, "we need to talk about security." "Security?" "You mentioned that witnesses are being intimidated and that conversations might be monitored. If we're going to do this right, we need to be smarter than they are." Dr. Yellowhorse pulled out what looked like a small radio. "This is a signal detector. It picks up electronic listening devices." She turned it on and immediately it began beeping. "Your phone is being tracked," she said matter-of-factly. Lisa felt violated. "How is that possible?" "It's easier than you think, especially in a small town where certain people have connections." Dr. Yellowhorse handed Lisa a different phone. "Use this from now on. It's encrypted and much harder to monitor." Their first stop was to visit Elena. Dr. Yellowhorse wanted to examine the scars and document them scientifically. Elena was waiting for them at the community center, in the same corner where Lisa had first met her. "Dr. Yellowhorse," Elena said, "I've heard about your work. And I've heard about your courage." "Mrs. Crowfeather." Dr. Yellowhorse set up her equipment on a nearby table. She had cameras, measuring devices, and what looked like a small computer. "I want to photograph and measure the scars," she explained. "I also want to take some tissue samples if you're willing." "Will it hurt?" "Less than getting the scars did." Elena rolled up her sleeves and placed her hands on the table under a bright light. Dr. Yellowhorse worked carefully, photographing each scar from multiple angles and taking precise measurements. "Remarkable," she murmured as she worked. "What's remarkable?" "The consistency of the patterns. These scars follow exactly the same configuration I've documented in 3 other cases of inherited trauma. You've seen this before? Not identical to this, but similar. I've documented cases where children of Holocaust survivors developed physical marks that matched their parents' injuries. I've seen it in families of torture survivors from various conflicts. Dr. Yellowhorse took small samples of scar tissue using a device that looked like a tiny cookie cutter. What will you do with those samples?" "I'll analyze them for stress markers and other indicators that can help prove they're related to traumatic events." After finishing with Elena, they drove to visit Rose, who had agreed to come out of hiding for the examination. Rose was nervous but determined. "If this helps prove what happened, then it's worth it." Dr. Yellowhorse documented Rose's scars as well. and the patterns were remarkably similar to Elena's. The location and depth of these marks suggest they were caused by the same type of instruments, Dr. Yellowhorse explained. This isn't coincidence. Their next stop was Phoenix to examine Grace. The drive gave Lisa and Dr. Yellowhorse time to talk about the bigger picture. Lisa, what you've uncovered here is more than just historical abuse, Dr. Yellowhorse said. This is evidence of a systematic pattern of violence that was covered up by local institutions. But can we prove it happened? We already have. The combination of documentary evidence, witness testimony, physical evidence, and scientific analysis creates a compelling case. But will anyone believe it? Dr. Yellowhorse was quiet for a moment. That depends on how we present it. In Phoenix, Grace was waiting with her daughter. Dr. Yellowhorse's examination of Grace revealed the same patterns they had seen in Elena and Rose. All three women have identical scar configurations. Dr. Yellowhorse explained to Lisa and Grace's daughter. This is scientific proof that their grandmothers and aunts experienced similar trauma. Grace's daughter was amazed. So this is real? This actually proves what happened. Combined with the other evidence, yes. Dr. Yellowhorse spent the next several days analyzing all the evidence Lisa had collected. She examined the photographs, read through the journals and letters, and consulted with experts in various fields. On Thursday morning, she called Lisa with exciting news. I've been in contact with a forensic anthropologist at the FBI, she said. They're interested in examining some of our evidence. The FBI, historical civil rights violations fall under federal jurisdiction. If we can prove that local law enforcement was complicit in covering up these crimes, it becomes a federal matter. That afternoon, Dr. Yellowhorse introduced Lisa to Agent Jennifer White, a federal investigator who specialized in cold cases involving civil rights violations. Agent White was younger than Lisa had expected, probably in her early 30s, but she spoke with authority and seemed to know exactly what questions to ask. Dr. Yellowhorse has shared your preliminary findings with me, Agent White said. I'm impressed with the quality of evidence you've collected. Does this mean you'll investigate? I'm already investigating. I've been looking into patterns of abuse against Native Americans throughout the Southwest. The Brennan case fits into a larger pattern we've identified, Agent White explained, that the FBI had been building cases against several prominent families who had systematically abused Native American workers in the mid-20th century. The difference with your case is the quality of documentation, she said. Most victims from that era left behind little evidence. But your witnesses preserved journals, photographs, letters, things that create a clear picture of what happened. What about the intimidation that's happening now? Agent White's expression hardened. Tell me about that. Lisa explained about the legal threats, the break-in at Rose's trailer, and the mysterious visitors to Betty's nursing home. Have you reported any of this to local law enforcement? The witnesses don't trust local law enforcement. They say Thomas Brennan has too much influence. Agent White nodded. That's actually helpful information. If we can prove that local authorities are failing to protect witnesses, it strengthens our federal case. Over the next several days, Agent White conducted her own interviews with Elena, Rose, Betty, and Grace. She also examined all the physical evidence with FBI forensic experts. The results were even more compelling than Lisa had hoped. The forensic analysis confirms that all the documentary evidence is authentic, Agent White explained. The photographs haven't been altered. The journal entries match the paper and ink that would have been available in the 1940s, and the hospital records are genuine. What about the scars? Dr. Yellowhorse's analysis is groundbreaking. She's documented a phenomenon that could revolutionize our understanding of intergenerational trauma. Agent White had more news. We've also been investigating the current situation at the Brennan Ranch. You were right to be concerned. What do you mean? We've received complaints from several women who have worked there recently. Nothing as severe as what happened in the 1940s, but there are patterns of workplace harassment and intimidation. Lisa felt a mix of vindication and sadness. The abuse hadn't ended with James Brennan's death. It had just evolved. What happens now? Agent White smiled. Now we build a case that will finally bring justice to these families. That evening, Lisa called Elena with the good news. Elena, the FBI is taking this seriously. They believe our evidence proves what happened to your grandmother? Elena was quiet for a long time. Lisa, do you know what this means to me? I think so. For 75 years, my family has carried shame about what happened to Morningstar. We thought somehow she had brought it on herself, or that we should have protected her better. Elena's voice broke. Now we know the truth. She was the victim of a crime, and the people who should have protected her were the ones who helped cover it up. Elena, your grandmother was incredibly brave. She documented everything, knowing that someday someone would listen. She was right. It just took longer than she hoped. As Lisa hung up the phone, she realized that this story had become about more than just exposing historical injustice. It had become about healing wounds that had been festering for 3 generations. The evidence was clear. The FBI was involved, and the truth was finally going to come out. But Lisa also knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Going public with this story would bring intense scrutiny, legal challenges, and possibly even more intimidation. The question was, were they strong enough to see it through to the end? Agent White gave Lisa permission to publish her story, with one condition: the FBI investigation had to remain confidential until their case was complete. You can publish everything you've found about the historical abuse, Agent White said, but don't mention the current federal investigation yet. Lisa worked for 2 weeks writing the most important story of her career. She wrote about Morningstar's journal, about the scars that had been passed down through generations, about the systematic cover-up that had allowed James Brennan to abuse Native American women for over a decade. Her editor, David, had initially been nervous about the legal threats, but Agent White's involvement changed everything. If the FBI is backing this story, we're publishing it, David said. The story ran on a Sunday morning in a special edition of the local newspaper, but Lisa knew the local paper wouldn't be enough. She had also sent the story to several national news outlets. By Monday morning, Lisa's phone was ringing constantly. The first call came from CNN, then the Washington Post, then NPR. Within 48 hours, reporters from across the country were arriving in town to cover the story. But the call that meant the most came from Elena. Lisa, I just read the story, Elena said, her voice full of emotion. You told it exactly right. I kept my promise. I didn't make your grandmother into just a victim. I made sure people understand how strong she was. The phone has been ringing all morning. Reporters want to talk to me. Are you ready for that? Elena laughed. I'm 73 years old. I've been waiting my whole life to tell this story. I'm ready. The response to the story was immediate and intense. On social media, people were sharing it with comments like, "This needs to be read by everyone," and "How did this stay hidden for so long?" But there was also pushback. Thomas Brennan released a statement through his lawyer. These are unsubstantiated allegations about events that supposedly happened over 70 years ago. The Brennan family categorically denies these claims and reserves the right to take legal action against anyone spreading false information. Some people in town sided with the Brennans. Lisa received several angry phone calls and emails from people who accused her of attacking a respected local family and dredging up old gossip, but the support outweighed the criticism. Donations started pouring in to support Elena, Rose, Betty, and Grace. A legal defense fund was set up to help them if the Brennan family followed through on their lawsuit threats. More importantly, other people started coming forward. The first was Maria Santos, a 70-year-old woman who lived in New Mexico. She called the newspaper and asked to speak to Lisa. I read your story online, Maria said. My aunt worked for a ranch in Colorado in the 1950s. She had similar experiences. Similar how? The abuse, the cover-up, everything. And our family has the scars too. Over the next week, Lisa received calls from people in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. All had similar stories about Native American women who had worked for powerful ranch families in the mid-20th century. Dr. Yellowhorse was ecstatic. Lisa, you've uncovered a regional pattern of abuse. This isn't just about one ranch or one family. This was systematic across the entire Southwest. The story took on a life of its own. Native American rights organizations got involved. Academic researchers started investigating similar cases in other states. A documentary filmmaker reached out about making a film, but the biggest breakthrough came 2 weeks after the story was published. Lisa got a call from a woman named Jennifer Brennan. I'm Thomas Brennan's daughter, the woman said. I need to talk to you. Lisa was stunned. You want to talk to me? Not over the phone. Can we meet somewhere private? They met at a coffee shop 2 towns over. Jennifer Brennan was a well-dressed woman in her 40s who looked nervous and tired. I've been struggling with this since your story came out, Jennifer said. I've been carrying family secrets my whole life. What kind of secrets? Jennifer pulled out a folder. My grandfather kept journals too, but has told a different story than the one my family has been telling. Lisa's heart started racing. Your grandfather documented what he did? In detail. I found these after he died in 1987. My father tried to destroy them, but I saved them. Jennifer opened the folder. Inside were pages from James Brennan's personal journal, written in his own handwriting. Lisa read the first page and felt sick. James Brennan had written about the Native American women who worked for him in crude, dehumanizing terms. He described abusing them as if it were his right. Jennifer, why are you showing me this? Jennifer started crying. Because I have daughters, and I can't let them grow up in a family built on lies and violence. What about your father? What will he do when he finds out you're talking to me? I don't care anymore. I'm tired of protecting him. I'm tired of protecting a legacy that shouldn't exist. Jennifer's journals provided the missing piece of the puzzle. They proved beyond any doubt that James Brennan had systematically abused Native American women and had bragged about it in his private writings. But they also revealed something else. Look at this entry from 1953, Jennifer said, pointing to a page Lisa read. The old woman Catherine had to be dealt with. She was becoming a problem. Asking too many questions and taking pictures made it look like an accident by the river. No one will miss one more dead Indian. Lisa felt the room spin. Jennifer, this is a confession to murder. Jennifer nodded. Catherine Blue Moon. I looked her up after I read your story. She was Rose Two Eagle's grandmother. You have to give this to the FBI. I already have. I contacted Agent White yesterday. That evening, Lisa called Rose with the devastating news. Rose, we found evidence about what happened to your grandmother, Catherine. What kind of evidence? Lisa explained about Jennifer Brennan and the journals. Rose was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. So she was murdered. Yes, I'm so sorry, Rose. Don't be sorry. Be glad. For 70 years, I've wondered what happened to her. They told us she had an accident, but we never believed it. Now we know the truth. Are you okay? Rose actually laughed. I'm better than okay. My grandmother died trying to protect other women. She died fighting against evil. That's not a tragedy, that's heroism. The revelation about Catherine Blue Moon's murder made national headlines. The story was no longer just about historical abuse. It was about a cover-up that had included murder. Thomas Brennan tried to distance himself from his grandfather's actions, but the damage was done. His business partnership started falling apart. He was removed from several community boards. Some of his employees quit, but more importantly, the story had opened floodgates that couldn't be closed. Native American communities across the Southwest started talking about their own buried stories. Universities began researching patterns of abuse against Native Americans. Congress announced hearings on historical injustices. Dr. Yellowhorse was invited to testify before a Senate committee about intergenerational trauma. Elena, Rose, Betty, and Grace were invited to share their stories at a congressional hearing Lisa watched on television as Elena sat before a panel of senators and told Morning Star's story with dignity and strength. My grandmother was 19 years old when she started working for James Brennan, Elena said. She was just a girl who needed a job to feed her family. She didn't deserve what happened to her. None of the women deserved it. Senator Martinez from New Mexico leaned forward. Mrs. Crowfeather, what would you want people to learn from your grandmother's story? Elena looked directly into the camera. That silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. That trauma doesn't disappear just because we don't talk about it. And that it's never too late to tell the truth. As Lisa watched Elena speak, she realized that this story had become bigger than any of them had imagined. It had become a catalyst for conversations that needed to happen, for healing that had been delayed too long. The scars on Elena's hands were no longer just reminders of past trauma. They had become symbols of survival, resistance, and the power of truth to overcome even the most determined efforts to bury it. James Brennan had thought his secrets would die with him. But secrets have a way of surviving, passed down through generations until someone is brave enough to speak them aloud. And finally, after 75 years of silence, The truth was being heard. 6 months after the story broke, Lisa returned to the reservation for a special ceremony. The Apache community was holding a memorial service to honor Morningstar, Yellowbird, Dancing Cloud, Catherine Blue Moon, and all the other women who had suffered in silence. The ceremony was held at sunrise, in a clearing surrounded by desert mountains. Over 200 people attended, tribal members, supporters from around the country, and even some reporters who had become personally invested in the story. Elena sat in the front row wearing traditional Apache dress. The scars on her hands were visible, but she no longer tried to hide them. She had learned to see them as badges of honor, proof of her grandmother's courage and her own strength. Rose Two Eagles sat beside her, along with Betty Hawkfeather and Grace Ironbear. The 4 elderly women had become close friends over the past months, bonded by their shared experience of carrying family secrets and their shared courage in finally speaking the truth. Dr. Yellowhorse was there too, along with Agent White and several other FBI investigators. The federal case was still ongoing, but they had made significant progress in documenting the broader pattern of abuse across the Southwest. As the sun rose over the mountains, Elena stood up to speak. "We gather today not just to remember the women who suffered," she began, "but to celebrate the women who survived." Elena's voice was strong and clear as she spoke about her grandmother. "Morningstar. My grandmother lived for 35 years after she left the Brennan Ranch. She raised 5 children, including my father. She taught traditional weaving to young women in the community. She was a healer who helped deliver dozens of babies." Elena paused, looking out at the gathered crowd. James Brennan tried to break her spirit, but he failed. She lived a full life despite what he did to her, and she made sure that someday her story would be told. Rose stood up next to speak about Catherine Blue Moon. "My grandmother, Catherine, died protecting younger women," Rose said. "She knew the risks, but she stood up to a powerful man anyway. That's not tragedy, that's heroism." After the memorial service, the community held a healing ceremony. Traditional songs were sung, prayers were offered, and people shared stories about their own families' experiences with historical trauma. Lisa watched from the back of the crowd, feeling both honored to be included and aware that this was not her moment. This was for the community to heal itself. But Elena called her forward. "Lisa Chen," Elena announced, "has been adopted into our community as an honorary daughter. She helped us find our voices when we thought they were lost forever." Lisa was presented with a traditional blanket and welcomed into the circle of women. Later that afternoon, Lisa met privately with Elena at her house. "How are you feeling?" Lisa asked. Elena looked down at her hands. The scars were still there, but they seemed different somehow. Less angry, more peaceful. "The scars are changing," Elena said. "Dr. Yellowhorse says it's not medically possible, but I can see it happening." "How are they changing?" "They're fading. Not disappearing completely, but becoming less prominent. Dr. Yellowhorse thinks it has to do with resolving the trauma, with finally telling the story." Elena made coffee and they sat together on her porch, looking out at the desert. "What's next for you?" Elena asked. Lisa had been thinking about this question for weeks. "I've been offered a job at the Washington Post. They want me to investigate similar cases across the country." "That sounds like important work." "It is, but I'm not sure I want to leave." Elena smiled. "You don't have to decide right away. But Lisa, you have a gift for helping people tell their stories. There are other families out there who need someone like you." Lisa had received dozens of calls from people across the country who had similar stories about their families. Native Americans, African Americans, immigrants, all with tales of abuse and cover-ups that had never been properly investigated. "Elena, did you ever think our story would become this big?" Elena shook her head. "I thought maybe a few people would read it in the local paper. I never imagined it would reach the whole country." The story had indeed reached the whole country. Congress had passed a resolution acknowledging historical injustices against Native Americans. Several universities had established research programs to investigate similar cases. A national database was being created to document patterns of abuse against minority communities. More personally, the Brennan Ranch had been sold. Thomas Brennan had faced no criminal charges. The statute of limitations had long passed. But the social and economic consequences had been severe. He had moved to another state to start fresh. The land that had once been the Brennan Ranch was being purchased by a coalition of Native American tribes who planned to turn it into a cultural center and memorial. "It feels right," Elena said when Lisa asked about the land purchase. "The place where so much pain happened will become a place of healing and education." As the sun began to set, Elena brought out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "I have something for you," she said. Inside the bundle was Morningstar's journal. "Elena, I can't take this. It belongs to your family. It does belong to my family, and you're part of my family now." Elena explained that she wanted Lisa to keep the journal as a reminder of the responsibility that came with being a storyteller. "This journal changed everything. Because you knew how to help people hear its message," Elena said. "There are other journals out there, other stories that need to be told. Promise me you'll keep telling them." Lisa held the journal carefully. It felt heavier than it had the first time Elena had shown it to her, weighted with history and hope. "I promise." That evening, Lisa attended a community dinner where people shared stories about how the past months had changed their lives. Betty Hawkfeather's granddaughter spoke about how her grandmother's courage had inspired her to become a lawyer specializing in civil rights cases. Rose Two Eagle's nephew talked about how learning the truth about Catherine Blue Moon had helped him understand his own family struggles with depression and trauma. Grace Ironbear's daughter announced that she was writing a book about intergenerational trauma in Native American families. But the most powerful moment came when a young woman named Jessica stood up. "I work at a law firm in Phoenix," Jessica said. 6 months ago, I was being harassed by my boss. I was afraid to speak up because he was powerful, and I thought no one would believe me." Jessica paused, looking directly at Elena. "But after I read about Morningstar and the other women, I found the courage to report what was happening. My boss was fired, and the company changed its policies to better protect employees." Jessica's voice broke with emotion. "These women showed me that silence doesn't protect us. It only protects the people who hurt us." As the evening wound down, Lisa found herself sitting with Dr. Yellowhorse, who had become not just a colleague, but a close friend. "Patricia, what's next for your research?" Dr. Yellowhorse smiled. "The National Institute of Health has approved funding for a major study on inherited trauma. We're going to document cases across the country and develop new treatments to help families heal." "That's incredible. Your story made it possible. Before this, most people thought inherited trauma was just psychological, but the physical evidence you documented, the scars, the medical records, prove that trauma can manifest in measurable, physical ways." Dr. Yellowhorse explained that medical schools were already incorporating their findings into curricula about trauma treatment. Doctors are learning to look for signs of inherited trauma in their patients. Therapists are developing new approaches to help families address generational pain. As Lisa prepared to leave the reservation that night, Elena walked her to her car. "Elena, I want you to know that meeting you changed my life." Elena smiled. "Meeting you changed mine too. But more importantly, it changed my grandmother's legacy. Instead of being remembered as a victim, she'll be remembered as a survivor who made sure the truth would eventually come to light." Elena handed Lisa a small package. "What's this?" "Seeds from my grandmother's garden. She grew traditional Apache plants, herbs for healing, flowers for ceremonies. Plant them wherever you go next. Let something beautiful grow from her story." As Lisa drove away from the reservation, she thought about the journey that had started with a simple question about what she thought were tattoos on an elderly woman's hands. That question had led to uncovering a decades-old conspiracy, launching federal investigations, changing national policies, and most importantly, helping 4 families find healing after generations of carried trauma. Lisa looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror and saw that she had changed too. She was no longer just a small-town reporter writing local stories. She had become someone who helped people find their voices and tell their truths. Her phone buzzed with a text message from a reporter in Oklahoma. "I have a story about missing Native American women that the local authorities won't investigate. Can you help?" Lisa smiled and typed back, "On my way." The work was far from over. There were more stories to tell, more truths to uncover, more families waiting for someone to help them break their silence. But Lisa was ready. She had learned from Elena, Rose, Betty, and Grace that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking the truth despite the fear. And she had learned from Morningstar's journal that some stories are too important to stay buried. No,